For 500 years, we believed we knew this face, the famous portrait in the National Portrait Gallery, London, the face of Anne Boleyn. But what if everything we've been looking at is wrong? Recent studies suggest something unsettling. This famous portrait of Anne Boleyn may not be Anne Boleyn at all. Maybe her daughter, Elizabeth I, a queen who lost her mother at 2 years old and never got to grieve her. A daughter quietly rewriting her mother's story, not with words, not with laws, but with a face the world would never question.
Welcome back to History Untold. I'm Alex, and together we'll uncover the hidden secrets of the past.
If these untold stories speak to you, hit the like button and join our family. Let's step into the past together. The lie on the wall. We all know this face. Dark, calm, and direct eyes. Dark hair under a French hood perfectly framed around her face. A small mouth held in a composed line. A graceful neck that gives the portrait its quiet elegance. Around her neck, a pearl necklace sits in neat layers. At its center hangs a single pendant with the letter B. The composed, almost unbothered expression of a woman who knows exactly who she is. The world has agreed for 500 years that this is Anne Boleyn. But this painting was made no earlier than 1584. We know this because scientists examined the wooden panel it was painted on. Trees grow a new layer of wood every year. These layers form visible rings inside the trunk. So a tree's life is recorded inside it, like natural timestamps. By examining these rings, scientists can figure out when the tree started growing and when it was cut down. This method is called dendrochronological analysis, or tree ring dating. In 2012, dendrochronologist Tyers carried out this analysis on the oak panel. When he studied the panel used for this painting, they traced those rings carefully. What they found was clear. The tree that provided the wood was still alive until 1584. That means the painting could not have been created before that year, because the wood simply did not exist as a panel before then. Anne Boleyn died in 1536. That is 48 years, nearly half a century between the woman and her most famous face. The artist who painted this never saw Anne, never sat in the same room as her, never watched her move or laugh or argue. They painted her from memory, or perhaps from other people's memory, almost 50 years after her head left her body. So the question isn't just what Anne Boleyn looked like. The question is, whose face did they actually paint? Here is your first clue. After her execution, most of her portraits were removed, altered, or lost over time during Henry VIII's reign and the political changes that followed. There is only one surviving image of Anne Boleyn that was created during her lifetime. The Most Happy medal is a lead portrait medallion from 1534. It was created 2 years before she died. It features the only undisputed contemporary likeness of Anne Boleyn created during her lifetime. A strong nose, high cheekbones, a strong, slightly receding chin, and a defined jaw. A face that is sharp and angular and distinctly, unmistakably not the soft, idealized face in that famous portrait. The medal also shows Anne wearing an English gable hood, likely chosen to present her clearly as the lawful Queen of England and reinforce her royal status. And that raises a question among historians. If this is how she appeared in her lifetime, why do the later portraits show something else? Do these two faces even belong to the same woman? What if someone very powerful appears to have made a very deliberate decision to change that? To understand who and why, we have to go back, way back,
to a morning in May 1536, and a little girl who had no idea her whole world had just ended.
The morning everything changed. It is early morning on Tower Green, London, May 19th, 1536. Anne Boleyn is 35 years old. She has been Queen of England for 3 years, and she is about to die. And at Richmond Palace, 2 years and 8 months old, Elizabeth Tudor has no idea. She is playing, perhaps, being dressed by her ladies, being fed, being a baby in the completely ordinary way that babies are on the morning her mother dies. Within days, everything changes for her. Henry had Anne's marriage declared legally invalid, which means Elizabeth was now, by law, no longer a princess. She became Lady Elizabeth. She was declared illegitimate. Her parents had never truly been married. She was stripped of her titles and sent away from court to Hatfield House. A 2-year-old, motherless, illegitimate, inconvenient. Henry VIII did not hate his daughter, but he could not look at her. Court records and letters from this period tell us that Elizabeth saw her father rarely, almost painfully rarely for a child. Those who knew the court noted what everyone could see. Elizabeth had Anne's eyes, dark, watchful, impossible to ignore. And Henry, who had destroyed Anne partly to escape the weight of her, did not need that reminder wandering around his palace in a small girl's body. So Elizabeth grew up mostly at Hatfield House, away from court, away from her father, raised by governesses on a reduced household budget. She wrote letters to Henry, careful, loving, heartbreakingly well-behaved letters that historians still have. She addressed him with perfect deference. She asked for small things, dresses, a chance to see him. Henry rarely wrote back, and through all of this, through the absence, the loneliness, the careful performance of being a child who asked for nothing and caused no trouble, she kept one thing close. We know from the inventory taken after Elizabeth's death in 1603 that she wore a locket ring her entire adult life. It's known as the Chequers ring. No one knew what was inside it. When it was opened after she died, inside were 2 tiny portrait miniatures, one of herself, one of a woman believed by historians to be Anne Boleyn. A woman the world had condemned, a mother she lost before she could truly know her. Elizabeth carried that face with her for 40 years, hidden, silent, untouched. She could not remember her mother's face. She was too young when she lost her, but still, she kept one close, as if she was holding on to something she had never really seen.
Elizabeth Tudor did not have a childhood. Not really. She had a performance. A long, careful, exhausting performance of being acceptable enough to survive. There was one brief moment of warmth, one brief exhale. Henry's 6th wife, Catherine Parr, brought Elizabeth back to court and actually cared for her. Under Catherine's roof, Elizabeth received the kind of education that even most men would never get. Latin, Greek, French, Italian, history, theology. She absorbed it all with a hunger that her tutors found remarkable, even slightly unnerving. Roger Ascham, one of her teachers, wrote that she had a mind that could match any scholar in Europe. She was building armor. She just didn't know it yet. When Henry died in 1447, Elizabeth was 13. The armor was about to be tested. She went to live with Catherine Parr, who had quickly remarried a man named Thomas Seymour. Thomas Seymour came from a power-hungry family. His sister, Jane Seymour, had become the 3rd wife of Henry VIII and later the mother of Edward VI. In many ways, the Seymour family had gained from Anne Boleyn's death, stepping closer to the center of royal power after her execution. Thomas himself was ambitious, wealthy, and politically well-connected. someone who knew exactly how close he stood to the crown. And in this house, under his influence, Elizabeth would live. At first, everything seemed almost proper, controlled, safe. But that didn't last. Thomas Seymour began entering Elizabeth's bedroom in the mornings, uninvited. He would pull back her bed curtains, tickle her. Sometimes Catherine Parr came with him, trying to make it feel playful, harmless, a joke. It was not a joke. Elizabeth was 14 years old, navigating the same trap her mother had once navigated. Powerful men using intimacy as a tool, as a game, as something they could take without asking. So she learned to be unreachable.
If you want to explore this part of Elizabeth's life in more detail and what really happened with Thomas Seymour, you can watch my full video. The link is in the description. In 1548, Seymour was arrested. Elizabeth was interrogated at 15 about what had happened between them. She answered every question with unusual control for her age and gave them nothing they could use. Even after her governess, Cat Ashley, and her cofferer, Thomas Parry, were arrested, she did not break. She responded to questions about Seymour's inappropriate behavior and his intent to marry her with surprising maturity, wit, and precision. In the end, she was cleared of any wrongdoing and released without punishment.
By then, her half-brother Edward VI was already on the throne. Under his rule, Elizabeth was politically safer than before, but Edward was sickly and he died young, and what came next was the thing Elizabeth had feared most since she was old enough to fear anything. Mary Tudor, Henry's Catholic daughter, became Queen of England. In the early years, she had shown moments of care toward her younger half-sister, Elizabeth I, especially during the unstable years after their father's death. But everything changed when Mary took the throne in 1553. The court around her was full of fear and suspicion, especially after the political moves and rebellion attempts led by figures like John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. Mary began to see threats everywhere, even within her own bloodline. And when she looked at Elizabeth, she didn't just see a sister, she saw Anne Boleyn's daughter, a living reminder of the woman she had never forgiven, a symbol of everything she had lost. After the Wyatt Rebellion in 1554, a Protestant revolt that Mary's advisors tried to link directly to Elizabeth, the pressure to execute her grew fast. Mary hesitated. She had no solid proof, but the court kept pushing, the fear kept growing, and instead of ending it, Mary chose something almost worse. She sent Elizabeth to the Tower of London, through Traitor's Gate, the same stones, the same cold water lapping beneath the archway where Anne Boleyn had entered 18 years before and never walked out of. Elizabeth was 20 years old. She sat on the wet steps of the gate and refused to move. Some accounts say she told them she would rather sit in the rain than enter as a traitor because she was not one. She sat there in the rain for a while. Despite her protests, she was forced to enter the Tower of London, walking through its heavy gates and under the bloody tower archway. She spent 2 months inside those walls, not knowing if she would leave alive. She had nothing to do but think about her mother, about the same stones, about survival. But in the end, Queen Mary's advisors could prove nothing against her, no evidence, no solid proof, and just as suddenly as she had been taken in, she was released. Elizabeth Tudor, the future Queen of England, did not walk out of the tower the same person she was when she entered. She had learned something her mother never got the chance to learn. You cannot fight power with emotion. You fight it with patience, with silence, with the absolute iron control of your own story. November 17, 1558. Elizabeth Tudor is 25 years old, and she is Queen of England. The crowds that line the streets of London to see her are weeping, actually weeping with relief. Mary's reign had been defined by burnings. Nearly 300 Protestants were executed for their faith in 5 years. The country is exhausted, traumatized, and desperate for something different. And here she comes, young, red-haired, brilliantly alive, riding through the city like England itself has taken a breath. She is magnificent, and she is completely alone with what she carries, because the moment her coronation is celebrated, the attacks begin. The Roman Catholic world refuses to accept her. The Pope will not recognize her legitimacy. Their argument is old and simple and vicious. Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn was invalid, always was, which means Elizabeth was never legitimate, which means she has no right to this crown, no right to this throne, no right to this country that is cheering her name in the streets. This argument does not go away. It follows her for 30 years like a shadow she cannot outrun. Supporters of Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's Catholic cousin who believes she is the rightful Queen of England, use it as a weapon constantly. Every conspiracy, every assassination plot, every whisper in every dark corridor comes back to the same point. Elizabeth is a bastard. Her mother was a traitor. The crown on her head is stolen. And then, in 1585, a Catholic exile named Nicholas Sander publishes something that takes all of that hatred and pours fuel on it. He describes Anne Boleyn as physically monstrous, a large growth under her chin, a projecting tooth, a 6th finger on her right hand, a mark, he implies, without saying it directly, of something evil. Sander used the common belief of his time that inner evil showed itself through physical deformity. He calls her a seducer. He calls her corrupt. He makes her sound like something that should not have existed. Let me be very clear about something. Anne Boleyn was never charged with witchcraft, not once, not in 1536, not ever. The charges against her were adultery and incest, almost certainly fabricated by Thomas Cromwell to get rid of her. The witchcraft story, the 6th finger, the devil's mark, most famously spread by Nicholas Sander decades after she was dead, specifically to make Elizabeth's existence seem unnatural. Every word written against Anne was a dagger aimed at her daughter. And Elizabeth, the most powerful woman in England, could not pull a single one of them out. She could not rehabilitate Anne without questioning her father's justice. She could not publicly mourn without giving her enemies the ammunition to call her unstable, compromised, too emotional to rule. She was a queen, and she could not defend her own mother's name. But she had learned something in that tower, in those cold months of silence and waiting. You don't always fight with words. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is the thing nobody can prove you did.
By 1583, Elizabeth has been queen for 25 years, and the world around her is closing in. The Throckmorton plot, a sophisticated Catholic conspiracy to assassinate her, free Mary, Queen of Scots, and hand England back to Rome, has just been uncovered. It is not the first attempt on her life. It will not be the last. Sander is preparing his publication. The attacks on Anne's memory are building toward their loudest, most vicious pitch. And then, quietly, without announcement, without any public declaration, the portraits begin appearing. 2 of the most important surviving images of Anne Boleyn have now been scientifically dated. The National Portrait Gallery portrait, the one the whole world knows, the bee necklace, the defining image, has been dated using dendrochronology to 1584 at the earliest. The Hever rose portrait,
which shows Anne holding a single red rose, has now been dated to 1583 or later. Two of Anne's most powerful surviving images were both made in the same narrow window of time. Both made during Elizabeth's reign, both made at the exact moment her mother was being painted as a monster. This is not a coincidence, it cannot be, but it is the next discovery, the one that stops you cold, that makes it undeniable. Researchers examining the Hever rose portrait with infrared technology found something hidden beneath the surface of the paint, something the naked eye cannot see. In the original composition, the version the artist painted first, Anne's hands were not visible. The painting showed the standard pose, the standard costume, the standard image. Then someone came back and added the hands. 10 fingers holding a red rose, the Lancastrian symbol, tied to her husband Henry VIII's royal lineage, painted deliberately, carefully, visibly at the precise moment Nicholas Sander was preparing to tell the world that Anne Boleyn had 6 fingers. Let that sit for a moment. Even as queen, Elizabeth could not arrest Nicholas Sander. He lived in exile, far beyond her reach. She could not stop the propaganda against her mother. So she answered it with a brush. They called her evil, claimed she had 6 fingers, twisted her image into something monstrous. She responded by showing her face as it truly was, beautiful, composed, and unmistakably human, with 10 fingers captured in paint and placed where all could see. Let them look. Let them decide for themselves. That is not art. That is a very quiet, very elegant act of war. And then there is the face itself. In February 2026, historians Dr. Owen Emmerson and Kate McCaffrey launched the groundbreaking book and exhibition Capturing a Queen, the Image of Anne Boleyn at Hever Castle. Working with art researcher Lawrence Hendra, they analyzed the facial geometry of the NPG Anne Boleyn portrait, the curve of the eyebrows, the proportion of the eyes to the nose, the precise shape of the mouth, and compared it against portraits of Elizabeth I from the same period. The measurements mapped almost perfectly. The theory that emerges is this. By the 1580s, there were standardized face patterns for Elizabeth, official approved templates that artists used across England to create portraits of the Queen. The theory is that whoever painted the NPG Anne Boleyn portrait did not use a portrait of Anne as their template. There weren't any they could trust, nothing drawn from life that showed what she actually looked like, because after her death, her portraits were destroyed. So they used Elizabeth's face, the Queen's own approved image pressed gently over her mother's portrait. The condemned woman given the face of the monarch. The traitor was made to look like the savior of England. Think about what that means. Every person in England who looked at that portrait and saw a regal, composed, legitimate face was seeing Elizabeth's argument made in paint, was seeing a daughter's defense of her mother delivered without a single word. My mother was not a monster. She looks like me, and nobody calls me a monster. Do they? But it still doesn't answer the real question. If the NPG portrait shows Elizabeth's face on Anne's body, then what did Anne Boleyn actually look like? Here is where it gets extraordinary. We have words, real words written by real people who stood in the same room as Anne Boleyn and watched her. Francesco Sanuto, a Venetian diplomat, described her as, and I want you to notice what he doesn't say as much as what he does, quote, not one of the handsomest women in the world. He noted a swarthy complexion, a long neck, a wide mouth, and dark eyes that, he wrote, were impossible to stop looking at. He was not a fan. He was not flattering her. He was simply watching her, the way diplomats do, and writing down what he saw. The French poet Lancelot de Carles, who was present at the English court, wrote of a woman whose magnetism outpowered conventional beauty. People could not stop watching her even when they wanted to, even those who hated her. And then there is the medal. The 1534 Most Happy Medal, named for her motto, is the only image made while Anne Boleyn was alive. It shows her face. Now, using the medal, the written descriptions, and AI facial reconstruction tools, historians and researchers have been building something new, a visual profile of Anne Boleyn that is based not on what Elizabeth's England decided, but on what the people who actually saw her recorded. The reconstruction shows a face that is sharper than the portrait the world knows, higher cheekbones, a more prominent nose, a darker complexion. Not pretty in the way people expect, but striking. A face that would have stood out immediately at the English court precisely because it did not look English. A face that looks, in a word, French. And that fits. Her entire look, the way she carried herself, was shaped by her years in the French court. So much so that people often mistook her for a Frenchwoman. A French scholar, poet, and diplomat once said she was so graceful and elegant that you would never take her for an Englishwoman, but a Frenchwoman born. So now we're left with 3 Annes. One described by the people who saw her, one rebuilt by science and history, and one carefully crafted by Elizabeth's England, the version they chose to remember. Anne Boleyn spent her entire queenship trying to control her story. She lost that fight in 1536, on a scaffold, on a Tuesday morning, inside the Tower of London. But her daughter, it seems, never stopped fighting it for her. The little girl Henry could not look at, the inconvenient, illegitimate, motherless Lady Elizabeth, who wrote careful letters to a father who rarely replied, became the most powerful monarch England had seen in a generation, maybe ever. And she did it entirely on her own terms. Elizabeth I reigned for 45 years. 45. She came to a throne that her enemies said she had no right to, in a country still bleeding from Mary's reign, in a Europe that was fracturing along religious lines so violently that queens were being overthrown and executed across the continent, and she held England together. Not because she was lucky, because she was brilliant, relentless, and because she had spent her entire childhood learning what it cost to be vulnerable. She never married. She had suitors from across Europe, powerful men, wealthy men, kings and princes and dukes who wanted her hand, and she kept them all at arm's length for decades, playing one off another, with a diplomatic skill that would have been impressive in anyone and was extraordinary in a woman the world expected to simply choose and submit. She chose England instead. She told Parliament when pressed, quote, "I am already bound unto a husband, which is the kingdom of England." It was not a deflection. She meant it. And England, complicated, ungrateful, fractious England, responded. She oversaw a golden age of English literature, exploration, and art. Shakespeare wrote under her reign. Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe. The English language, the English identity, the idea of England as a world power, all of it took shape under a queen who had once been a forgotten, illegitimate girl in a reduced household at Hatfield House, writing letters to a father who rarely wrote back. She had taken everything they tried to make her ashamed of, her mother, her birth, her gender, her religion, and she had built a reign from it. Not despite what happened to her, because of what she survived. Anne Boleyn was executed on charges so fabricated, so deliberately vicious that even people at court struggled to believe them. They charged her with adultery, with 5 men, and one of them, her own brother. They didn't just want to kill her, they wanted to make sure nobody would ever mourn her. And yet, she stands on that scaffold. And she praises the king. She submits to the law. She did not accuse anyone. She prays for the king. Because somewhere there was a little girl not yet 3 years old, and that little girl needed Henry's goodwill to survive. That was Anne's last act as a mother, a calculated, deliberate, loving lie. So here's the question I want to leave you with. When you look at the NPG portrait now, that famous face, those dark eyes, that composed and perfect expression, who do you see? Do you see Anne Boleyn, or do you see a daughter who loved her mother in the only way she was allowed to? Let me know in the comments, because I think history is still deciding. And if this story moved you, if you found yourself feeling something for a 2-year-old girl who lost her mother to a scaffold and grew up to be one of the greatest queens who ever lived, please share this video, like it, subscribe, because there are more stories like this, buried, waiting, and they deserve to be heard. I will see you in the next video.